at the same spot.
We just had so much fun.
Hopefully we're wearing different clothes than we were wearing last week. Otherwise, people are going to start getting suspicious. And I'm definitely wearing something different.
But it looks a little, it's raining.
You can see the weather back there. So definitely it's different. But welcome to the Traction Lab weekly reality check, also known as our office hours, also known as an Ask Us Anything in AMA format. We just, shoot the shit on whatever you want to shoot the shit about. Probably startups, but we'll talk TV. That's fine too. No problems there. We'll talk whatever you want to talk about. If you want to talk about Artemis, I am all down for talking more about Artemis. That definitely something I talked about on the podcast as well. So check that out. But with that, we have 5 questions, I think, that were pre-submitted. Not sure we're going to get through them all, although we are usually a little faster in person than we are when we're both in our own offices. But we do prioritize the live questions. Cameron's warming up the LinkedIn chat there. So y'all on LinkedIn, on YouTube, feel free to chime in down into the comments. And if you want to submit a question in advance, have a little bit more breathing room, you can go to jdm.bio, fill out the little form there on the calendar link. And just like these fancy people who did, we can take your question a little bit more robustly.
Yeah. And thanks for pre-submitting. It means a lot. So we have questions to answer. So if not, we'd just be hanging out. So thanks for all of you that pre-submitted, and hopefully you're getting the recording to be able to, get your answers that you need, or the questions we actually ask back. We
do appreciate it. So if you've got a question.
We already got a live one here, so.
Oh my goodness!
Is that Schmillup Mason?
Schmillup Mason's got a question in the chat there. So let's just start with the live one, because we do prioritize the live one. So forgive me while I look down away from camera to read it, because it's going to cut off. But I'm in a pilot with a 300 location funeral home consolidator, and we're having the pricing conversation today for a potential network-wide rollout. How do you know when to hold firm on price with a large enterprise partner versus making concessions to win the sale? And what do founders most often get wrong in that moment? Okay, so actually one thing I do want to say first is well done in at least acknowledging that the price is an important part and that there's boundaries to be set there. So thinking about that in advance is better. One of the actual, this is true, one of the things that differentiates high-performing sales people as opposed to those who perform average or lower is their willingness and forwardness and directness when it comes to price. So the more averse you are to actually discussing price and to getting into financial details, statistically, the less likely you are to perform well as a salesperson. I'm not going to imply any causality there, but those two things go together. So well done. As far as like the specific things here, do you want to take it first, or do you want
go for it? I'll add on.
All right. How do you know when to hold firm on price? Okay, so there's a couple things here. So one is not all things are negotiable. So that just is what it is. Is there a reason for the price to be negotiable? So you might have a case where now we're going to be looking at volume discounts. So it's different than one, funeral home signing up, and that's fine. But hey, this one's, large, it's volume. So from our perspective, the customer acquisition costs, kind of works out a little bit to our advantage in that case. That's not always true, by the way. Sometimes it's the opposite of that. But if that's all the case, and so you're thinking about exploring that, then that's great. Then you don't necessarily need to hold firm on price, because you have an hypothesis or a theory about why it makes sense to actually drop the price in that case. And then what you will want to think through is then what makes financial sense for you. And I'm answering this with an all things being equal perspective, which is probably not fair, and I'll circle back to that in just a second. But all things being equal, then it's like, okay, how does this pencil out? How does this work for other deals? Like, if we were to adopt this going forward, are we just losing money at scale? Is this going to affect our payback period too much? There's all of those things to just like unit economics things to consider there. Okay, so I said to come back to all things being equal, because I think that's an important thing to call out. Is sometimes we're willing to make sacrifices on a per deal basis because we want the logo or something like that. And it's the first one to break in a series of whatever. This is not your first customer. So I don't know how much of that is true here. They're a consolidator. What does that mean for the industry? Is it like important enough, for that? And that's great. One last thing, and maybe you can sort of speak more to this, or I'm sure you have your own thoughts as well, is I'm curious about to what degree price is a motivating factor in their decision to go with you or not. Mm-hmm. That's actually really interesting to me. And so this is what we usually call price sensitivity. And so how price sensitive are customers? Most of the time, if you're in an early stage startup, you want to be chasing customers who are not price sensitive. It's just better. And it takes one thing off the table, and it's like usually a signal of severity and urgency, because it's, the difference between $10 a month and $15 a month isn't going to make or break the deal. That having been said, some customers are inherently more price sensitive, and they're looking at 300 locations and the math scales. So like the difference between $10 and $15 a month would, mathematically equates to a lot bigger value, and you're charging more than that. So that's just something that I'm curious about is in your mind, how much is price going to be the differentiator, or sorry, the most important factor?
Yeah, like, is that the most important thing in the negotiation, is the price, or is it other elements that they're wanting in terms of like the value that you're deriving? So is it that they actually don't mind the price, but they want to be able to have greater access to you for key questions or things of that nature? And so they're actually like wanting more value out of the dollars that they're spending. And so understanding what that negotiation might actually lean into. I think obviously as a consolidator, they do have some bargaining power, but is again, that price the main driving force? I think the additional element is trying to put yourself in the shoe of the actual person you're negotiating with. And so like, are they given a set budget and they have to bring down the price? Or is it like, hey, they don't really care as much, and they're like, hey, let's just, my goal is actually to get the deal closed as soon as possible going forward. And so understanding from an individual level what that might look like as well. I think if you are going to negotiate on price in the sense of like, you might have to drop it a tad, is thinking through of like, what is your capturing a value back in another way? So meaning, if you bring on this consolidator, obviously that's going to increase your loan volume going forward. And so like, you more quickly capture value by using these types of partners going forward. So, you see this all the time where like they're looking at economies of scale because they're a consolidator. And so they're bringing that bargaining power to fruition. But you have to look at some of your unit economics of like, okay, the cost to acquire this customer, and then the lifetime value of them as a subscriber, but then also like now you have access to way more potential lending opportunities, which ultimately opens a whole new revenue stream as well. So those would be the things that I would be thinking about in terms of like, I guess challenges founders most make is probably dropping the price to a point where it doesn't actually make sense. So they're more hunting for the logo than they are for the long-term value of this. And additionally is you set a precedent as soon as you basically change the price for this, right? So I don't know if the industry has another consolidator or a big whale similar to this, and they're like, oh, well, what pricing did they get? And it's kind of hard to be like, oh, well, this is what we sold. And so now you kind of set the precedent that's kind of the pricing scheme going forward for these large players that have that bargaining power. So I think that's oftentimes can be a slippery slope. But I think there's obviously a fine balance in terms of overall negotiation. The more you anchor that conversation around being the first to bring up, here's the price that we're targeting, recognizing you can only go down from there. Or if they say, hey, this is the price we're willing to pay, and it's way far off from where you're at, you're seeing where that gap is. And so usually, kind of anchoring that conversation can be to your advantage as well.
And the last thing that I'll say is a psychological one, which is to know where you are in this. How important is this deal for you to close? That is a signal or even a determining factor of what your raw power is. Mm-hmm. So the less you feel able to walk away, the less power you have and the more power they have. And so setting up in advance in your head what those boundaries are is going to make those conversations go much more in your favor, because then you understand, here's how badly I need this translated to dollars, and at what point do I no longer need it anymore. And now you have this kind of leverage of reality in that. And if reality is kind of pointing the other way, and for your runway, you just really need this deal to close, and like we just don't have a choice, then like that's, you know, that is what it is. So great question. Thanks for chiming in. If you got a question live, drop them down into the chat. Always prioritize the live questions, but we'll go to pre-submitted questions. This one was one from just before we went live last week, like 10 minutes before we went live. And so it did not end up in our queue because we had queued it up a little bit in advance of that. So apologies for missing your question last week, but we're going to cover it here. The question's kind of light. There's not a lot of detail here, but that's fine. We'll do it anyway. Yeah, we can absolutely handle it. So this is a B2C mobile app for stressed workers and students. Our favorite, yeah. B2C mobile app for stressed students and workers. And the question is super light. Did you see that Philip's comment in there?
You know, he's a Traction Lab community guy here, so I love thank you, sharing much
to Philip Schmason as well. If you know, you know. That's what we're going to follow that. If you know, you know. All right. They've got an MVP in progress for these stressed workers and students. Mm-hmm. And the question is, what is the best way to start building some momentum before the MVP is launched? I think I want to challenge the premise a little bit. I think that's what I want to do here. And that is to say that what a startup is, what a business is finding a customer with a problem that you can solve for money. That's it. Find a customer whose problem you can solve for money. And the reason that I want to oversimplify it that far is because nobody's going to really disagree with that definition. They might say where there's more detail we want to add in or emphasize something, but nobody's going to disagree that our point is to find a customer with a problem we can solve for money. The first item in that list is to find a customer. And so if we do not already have a pathway to get in front of customers and recruit them and to get them into it, then we don't necessarily know even yet that we have a customer with a problem that we can solve for money. And instead we're doing a solution and then hoping we can then find a customer with a problem that's severe and urgent enough that that happens to be the right solution for, and to a degree that they will pay for. So we're just kind of fundamentally doing things backward. And I'm not saying that you're doing that. You don't give enough detail in the question for that to be reality, or known reality at least. That having been said, assuming that you have not yet figured out how to get in front of customers, tap the brakes on the MVP because you actually don't know what to build yet. And you're jumping ahead a bit and assuming a lot that's not in evidence. And I want you to get some evidence for that. But let's assume for the sake of argument that you do have a customer, you do know where they are, you know how to get in front of them. And this is really a question about how do we just practically build momentum while we're getting this thing ready to go. Assuming that that's true, I'll absolutely just answer that question, and you can feel free to take that in any direction you want. So my thinking on this is it's going to depend on a lot of details. Since you're doing B2C, I'm going to make a lot of assumptions because you're saying it's a B2C mobile app too, that this is going to be something that's self-serve, self-sign up. They're going to find out about you somehow. They're going to smash a link that's going to take them to the Play Store or the App Store. They're going to then download your app, and then they're going to sign up through an in-app purchase, whatever. And that's all going to happen in that capacity. So assuming that structure, then the first part of that, which is how do we get them to get to the button that they smash to install the app? Then that's the important part. It's not going to be inside the app stores. It's going to happen outside the app stores. It's going to happen however you're getting in front of them anyway, whether that's through social media, through ads, through paid search, through whatever, that's going to be where it matters. And how you're getting in front of them is actually going to make a big difference to how you end up doing this at the end of the day. Common situation, though, would be to use something like a waitlist. And this is a great place to do a waitlist. There may be some noise in a second because I see lots of children running around. I don't know why there are children here.
Bunch of entrepreneurs.
Bunch of mini entrepreneurs, yes. Mini-preneurs. Entrepreneurs. I don't know. We'll come up with something. But a waitlist is a common tool, and what we're really doing is with the waitlist is actually testing out how well that channel converts, getting some understanding of some early unit economics, like what's our customer acquisition cost actually likely to be on something like this. Mm-hmm. Again, it's the early part of that. It's not enough to actually answer the question, but like we're getting some early data on that so that we can then, understand what's working and what's not, and then also have this group of people that we can kind of blast. However, if you're trying to build momentum, whatever that means, then there's lots of different little strategies that you can use that are all marginal differences. Things like where you can bump your spot on the wait list by referring friends. I'm not a believer in that kind of stuff. I don't think that really makes a lot of difference at the end of the day. So I'm not necessarily a fan of like those kind of tactics. They're lame as far as I'm concerned, unless you're operating in really large numbers, in which case you already have momentum anyway. So like, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of that kind of stuff. So then momentum here, like, what do you mean by it? Like, what does momentum look like? Can they pay now? Like, is that a thing? Can you actually just open up signups, do a fake door test, actually get people to opt in prior to the app being launched, and then you're just throwing them into the wait list, and you don't necessarily need to know that it's not ready yet. And that there's a lot of things to do there, but I think a lot of it's going to depend on what you mean by momentum. But I would also say, lastly, like the thing to challenge here is this idea of a launch in the first place. I don't know if
cool. Yeah, I think I can lead
okay,
into
got
that.
awesome.
So I think there's three things that I want to highlight. So I think building on where you were ending in terms of like what maybe momentum looks like. And I think for me, I'm interpreting when you're saying like I want to build momentum is gaining clarity about what to launch. And I think like where I'm reading into this is when we are thinking about momentum, it's that systematic acquisition of evidence that there's customer buying behavior. And I think when I look at your answer to who is your target customer, you say stressed workers and students, and those are very broad and also very different customer segments in the sense of the way you get in front of a working professional, which also could be someone from 25 to 65 and beyond, right? To then a student, and is that like high school students, college students, right? And is it students that are full-time or student athletes? Like how are we defining this in a narrower sense to see who actually has the pain point? And so I'm tying more of momentum to clarity about how do I get in front of this person to put our offer in front of them to see if there's willingness to pay or at least get value from what we're ultimately trying to create. And then in terms of our kind of challenging the notion of having a launch is that like the launch usually is a spike in interest, if that's something you use like Product Hunt or other forms, and usually isn't the systematic way to get in front of your customers going forward. You get that one inflection point, but then you don't necessarily have a clear path to get in front of those customers going forward. And so we want to challenge that component of things. And so I think those were the main things. Was one, really thinking through of like when you're defining momentum, is that actually you gaining clarity and what we would say is traction towards gathering evidence of customer buying behavior. And I think the fundamental question is to narrow down who specifically your customer persona is or your avatar, and what are their psychographics, the behaviors, what's the triggering event when the stress has become so much that they need this solution, and how are they trying to solve the problem now? And so I think there's a little bit of a lack of clarity there that I think as soon as you start to have a greater set of assumptions around that and gather evidence, you'll start to get that momentum, and the launch won't become this big moment, but that it's the systematic process of you trying to get in front of your customers, testing if you're right or wrong, and then moving forward as you actually gain progress and momentum.
Couldn't agree more. Don't chase the launch. It's seductive, but it's the siren song of stealthily suiciding startups.
Can you make a poem about that?
I certainly can. Would you like to hear a limerick? There once was a founder from Nantucket whose startup wasn't. Okay, you all can see where that was going to go. Okay, awesome. Cool. So if you've got a questions you want us to take live, you can drop that into the chat. We do have a set of more pre-submitted questions for us to get through here. I think we have 4 more in our list. If you want to submit a question in advance, get a little bit more breathing space, or even just watch or listen asynchronously, you can do that at jdm.bio. This is in the Traction Lab podcast feed every Wednesday, or you can, of course, watch the replay on YouTube. But here we go. This is B2B SaaS for CrossFit gym owners with 50 to 200 members. They are at 1.2 million ARR, up from 520 last year, 280 gyms subscribed. CrossFit HQ just announced they're launching their own gym management software and making it free for affiliates. We're completely screwed, right? They bought their own reality check, it would seem. Our entire business is about to get Sherlocked by the franchisor. Do we pivot to general fitness studios immediately or try to compete on features against free software backed by CrossFit's resources? Some of our gym owners are already asking if they should switch to the HQ software when it launches. We've got maybe 6 months before it rolls out. Thoughts?
You can take this one first. I need to.
Yeah, read through it again. Okay. So a couple of things come to mind. So this, like, you're targeting specifically CrossFit gym owners, and yeah, you are about to get Sherlocked by the franchisor. And should you try to compete against the free software? No, I don't think so. Unless that there's some key defining feature that you're providing that they aren't. And like ordinarily that might be enough, particularly in the early stages. But the bigger problem is that whatever the differentiator is, there's nothing stopping CrossFit from, and with its massive budget, from doing that. I do have additional questions. I'd love to hear more about like why CrossFit's doing that, and like what their motivation is for having this free software that they're giving to their franchisees. So I have a lot of questions about that. But aside from that, that does seem uncomfortable. I can't really answer the question about whether you should immediately pivot to some other gym owners, but I do think that there is something that needs to be figured out here, because this seems pretty dangerous. I'm also wondering, and I don't mean to blame you, but I'm wondering why we're blindsided by it. Like, why is this a sudden thing that now we don't have 6 months about? When we look at defensibility in the market, one of the things we're often looking at is this kind of thing. And I don't like that you were targeting us like franchisees with one franchisor who, for some reason, and I don't have visibility in the industry, but for some reason thinks that it's worth their financial interest to actually go ahead and do this. I'm not sure why that wasn't something that we knew about in advance. I'm not blaming you, but like, this is the importance of doing some of that, like risk mitigation, risk management, particularly when it comes to defensibility in advance. Particularly if you're fundraising, investors will push you on some of these things and you'll get to see these. But we have like an eggs in one basket thing. We're targeting all of these, this one group of people who are specifically franchisees to this franchisor who has a lot of power in the space. And I'm reading into this that they also have some type of motivation or financial interest in covering what you're covering. And that seems pretty dangerous to me. So that doesn't help you, but for everybody else out there in listening land, pay attention to that kind of market risk.
Yeah, so I wonder if there's an element of, like, I'm also curious, is like each gym, it sounds like each gym is its own economic buyer. And so I don't know if that's like somehow impacting the overall franchisor. And so understanding like if that's something that's impacting them, like is there a way to position your solution so they don't have to build it, they actually just pay you to then distribute to all of their franchisees. So I don't know if 280 gyms is, 1/10 of all their gyms, or if that's, 70% of their gyms. And so if that's something where you actually could do a deal with the overall group so they don't actually have to go and build it, that might be a way to, like, you might not have net revenue, but you might not lose all of that revenue going forward, and you actually might then have that kind of, at least you then have the recurring pros going forward. So I think there's probably more things to unpack too, of like what was the triggering event for this HQ to then be like, hey, is it that these CrossFit gyms like now are in like dire straits because people aren't coming, or it's actually like they've all talked about how great this solution is, and they're like, oh, well, like we should just build this within our current infrastructure to have everyone use it, right? And so then, maybe there's a way to position you actually as that solution. So maybe there's an opportunity to flip it on its head before they go invest all of those resources. That could be a signal that, hey, we're the solution to come in and do it, versus them investing that internal capacity going forward.
Definitely worth the conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's a bummer way to start. All right, let's move on to the next one. This is B2B SaaS.
I was like, should we get back to the funeral loans?
Yeah, exactly. So maybe Philip can help you guys out with your startup's final arrangements. That was a bad joke.
That was horrible.
Hey, you started it. You took us down that path. Okay. You can also put, yes, Cameron's reading ahead of the next one, which is baby sleep consultant. So you could help you put your startup to bed where it belongs. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. There's lots of things to do going forward. You're not dead. It's just we just don't have enough information to give you anything more specific. So that's what we're seeing in terms of the landscape. It's up to you to probe a bit more and then come back with some more detail. Happy to do that, or just send us a DM, and we're happy to have a conversation. Okay. B2B SaaS for baby sleep consultants. This is a follow-up from before. We kept the pricing at $45 a month and $45 per month and month anyway. Got 4 conversions out of our 11 pilots. The 7 who didn't convert all said the same thing: too expensive for part-time work. Are 4 paying customers enough to validate the business, or should we have gotten higher conversion? You should have gotten higher conversion. And the reason you should have gotten higher conversion is because that pricing should have been known and baked in advance. This is the danger of having those conversations where the pricing was not discussed in advance, is because you wasted your time on 7 people where price was always going to be a problem for them. Mm-hmm. And so we want to make sure when you're doing the pilots, charge for them. There's no reason not to charge for a pilot, but if you can't charge for it, if there's some logistical reason standing in your way of doing that, then at least say, this is the condition of success. This is the duration of the pilot. Upon that duration and that completion of that success, then you're going to enter into a contract. These are the terms of the contract. It's not legally binding, but it's going to surface a problem like pricing. And then if you're dealing with a larger organization than a baby sleep consultant, it's also going to help surface some contract requirements and who's involved in that process and stakeholders and approvals and everything else that you're just going to need to figure out. And you're not stuck having to figure that out after the pilot is done. So yes, you should have gotten a higher conversion rate, because you shouldn't be this is not an open-ended free trial where then we're going to eventually try to convert them. So now we're left with the question of, were the 4 versus the 7 who didn't, like that 4 versus 7, is that because those 4 and 7 looked different? And so there's something that the 4 have in common, and that's why they paid, versus the 7 who didn't. And if that's the case, and these 2 fundamentally look different, then our job becomes straightforward. Don't focus on the 7. They're not going to convert. Focus on the 4. And then can we turn that into a reasonable business? Is that enough of the market, or is it truly, more than half the market, nearly 2/3 of the market that we just can't sell to? And that would be an issue. Lots more than I could say on that, but I know you've got things to say.
Yeah, no, I think the biggest thing was, if you front loaded that conversation around pricing, you might then be able to see how could you get 7 people that looked like that 4. So I think the opportunity costs of not oftentimes putting that on the front end is, we waited to see and have that key learning of how we wanted to decide to move forward with the business, versus it being oh, interesting, on the front end of starting this pilot process, 7 of the 11 aren't willing to pay. Well, what's different about them from the other 4? And then can we go fill that gap of what our goal was for the pilot, whether that was 10 total companies or of these consultants to go through. And so then we might have been able to learn that it was actually these part-time ones. And so then we could have started building that engine. So I think, going forward JDM highlighted it, was narrowing down the specific differences between them, and not just from a demographics component, but what are the difference in terms of their psychographics, their needs, all of those particular elements, because that will then help you position, because there's obviously 4 that are seeing that value because there was a willingness to pay. And again, what is the outcome that they're buying in that process? So fundamentally is those 7 who opted out didn't see the return on investment for that $45 a month, whereas those other 4 did. And so what is that outcome that they're buying, and how are they rationalizing it to themselves? I
realized we botched this one a little bit. I know I said it out loud, but I didn't internalize it. This was a follow-up from before. So they did unpaid, if I'm remembering correctly, this was maybe a month back or something like that. They did the unpaid pilots before, and they were like, how do we now figure out pricing? And we were like,
oh.
So all of that stuff about pilots is all right. It just we told you it a month ago, I think. But for everybody else out there, it's valuable. For where you are right now, I think it's back to, again, like what makes the 4 different from the 7. And now so now we can't say, should we have gotten a higher conversion rate, because we actually don't know enough, because we didn't do the work in advance when we came up with the 11. So we can't say how many of those 11 should have converted because we didn't do it in that same order. So we can't actually answer your question. But the question that I think is more interesting is there something that makes the 4 different than the 7, and what does that say about the broader market and your ability to turn this into a profitable business? Anything to add there? Okay, cool. All right, if you've got a question live, we will happily and eagerly take your live questions. We kicked off with a banger from Philip, which was awesome. Thank you for that, Philip. But otherwise, drop it into the chat. We're doing our pre-submitted questions. You can go to jdm.bio, hit the calendar, and you can send one in as well. And that would be a lot of fun. But shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay. This is B2B SaaS for prop masters working on film and TV productions. I love it.
What's a prop master?
A prop master is the person who's responsible for the props.
Okay, got it.
For the props on set. It's a very, very, very cool field. I follow some prop masters on TikTok because they produce some really fun content, and it's fun to see how they do like create different things. I saw one recently explain how he created he had to have somebody eat a raw chicken breast. And so it has to look like a raw chicken breast, but the actor has to actually be able to take a bite out of it and eat it. And so they explain how they do that. It's pretty cool. All right. Not for everybody, but it is for me. I'm a Hollywood guy. Obviously. I'm not sure how I feel about that. All right. So the actual question from the prop master people is they say they have an MVP in progress and they're building prop inventory and continuity tracking software. So props departments are total chaos, tracking thousands of items, making sure everything matches between takes, coordinating with multiple departments. The prop masters I've interviewed are desperate for better tools, but here's what I just learned. Most prop masters are union and work for studios or production companies, not as independent contractors. They don't buy their own software. The production does. And productions are temporary, 8 weeks to 6 months. Then everyone moves to a new show with a new production company. So even if we sell to a production, that customer exists for only a few months. I have no idea how to build recurring revenue in an industry where the customers themselves are temporary. The production is a new sales cycle. Is this even viable? One prop master said, I've worked on 30 different productions in 10 years, each with different producers making purchasing decisions. How do you scale sales when your end users change employees every few months? So one of the things that I want to call out here is this distinction between like users and purchasers, which the questioner is making explicit. But what we're hearing is all about the value provided to the user and not the value to the purchaser. So if I were to make an analogy, and I apologize because it's going to be a poor one, but if we were to make an analogy to another aspect of the same production, would be something like film editors. Film editors have their film editing software. Is that film editing software all bought by the people who edit the films, or is that bought by the production company, or the tools that they use to share media between all of their disparate groups, between cinematography back to the editing team? Like all of that is stuff that they have to buy for across different productions. And I'm not saying that's 100% the same here, but in those cases, they're seeing the value of doing that because it's getting them something. And so in this case, what is the value outside of just what the prop masters get in terms of tracking continuity between takes? What is it that the production company is actually getting? Why is their life better? It's clear why their life is better in the case of editing software, because you got shit to edit. In the case of being able to trade files, between the whole team, that's a little bit murkier, and they were pitched something and they bought into that message and then literally bought into the software. And there's probably other pieces of software that fit that as well. Accounting software probably fits into that. And so you have to just reframe this a little bit as like, prop masters aren't your customers. The production companies are your customers. And so how do you sell to the production companies? Well, you sell to them by solving their problem. And what is their problem that you're solving by virtue of having prop masters as users? That's all I got.
Yeah, I don't have a ton else to add. I think like we haven't really dove too deep into like, I think we've kind of said, yes, obviously they're a part of the union in the case, not the independent contractors, but is there a set of people who are the independent contractors and potentially could purchase it? I don't know if that's something where then the production teams actually allow them to bring their own software, but it seems like we haven't really done the diligence to actually see where the barrier is in that process. So like, have they actually gone down the path of asking them and saying, oh, we actually can't buy this because we're union represented or we're an independent contractor and they don't allow us to bring our own software in. It seems like that's kind of potentially, we built the MVP and where we have this assumption in the market versus we tried these things and, you know, of the union represented people, they said they can't buy this or whatever that might be versus it being kind of an assumption is how I've read into it. So, yeah.
All right. I don't know what this was in reference, but I agree, Philip, obviously. All right. Now, we've got one more pre-submitted question, and then we should have time, I think, to take one, maybe two questions live before we have to run away. So if you've got a live question, YouTube, LinkedIn, talking to you, drop that in. Let's do it. B2B SaaS for surf schools teaching lessons to tourists and locals. All right, we're getting all kinds of things here, aren't we? All right. The product is live, but they're pre-revenue, and they say it's booking and waiver management for surf schools. Okay, super simple product, works great. 43 surf schools using it, free right now, good engagement. Problem is, surf schools are basically summer businesses in most places. They make all their money June through August, barely operate the rest of the year. When should we even launch paid plans? If we charge. Yes, but the rest of the question is if we charge year round, they'll say it's not worth it for 3 months of use. If we only charge during summer, that's weird and unpredictable for us. Also, most surf instructors are like stoned beach dudes who are not business minded at all. I love the joke there. They beat us to it. Not being judgmental, just stating facts. Getting them to pay for software is going to be a challenge regardless of timing. Okay, so I was going to reply to that, but I get you have a good reply to that. So I'm going to let you take that. And I'm just going to challenge the last piece of this here, and then you can take the meat of the question. So what I just want to poke at this like idea of they're stoned beach dudes, they're not business minded, so getting them to pay for software is going to be, no, you're lying to yourself. This is a case where we're telling ourselves a story that allows us to blame our lack of success on customers instead of on ourselves. And so I really do want to push back on that concept here. Whether you're not trying to get them to be business minded, you're trying to make their lives better. And if you're trying to sell them a vitamin, like hey, I know you haven't been sued yet, but you might be sued. Are you not getting them waivers signed? That is not a good business to be in. We don't want to sell vitamins. We want to sell painkillers. And so my guess here is that they are doing waivers. They're doing paper waivers. And the paper waivers right now are terrible and they have to file them somewhere and it kind of sucks. That pain is what they're paying for. And that pain has nothing to do with them being business minded or not. It has to do with why are they going to devote time, energy, money, whatever other resources that they have to adopting and using a solution. It's going to be because the problem is severe and urgent enough. So if they don't have a severe and urgent enough problem, that's because you're not choosing to solve a severe and urgent enough problem, not because your customer just doesn't get it. So like that, I get that we just get that same thing a lot. And I know I'm being a little harsh there, but I want to reframe that because you can't solve a problem of what's in a customer's mind. What you can solve is the problem of focusing on the wrong thing. And if you're focused on them being business minded and whatever value proposition isn't going to resonate with that, then you're focused on the wrong thing. And that's great news because you're banging your head against the wall and all you got to do is move 20 degrees because there ain't no wall over there. So just refocus and focus on the cool stuff. But I know that's not what you asked. So.
Well, no, and I think to that point is like as soon as you start having conversations of moving it from a free software to then something that's paid, we'll see where basically that need is. And so a core component of it, we're putting it on like these assumptions we haven't necessarily tested, and that being like, oh, well, we believe the objection we're going to get is they don't want to pay for for all the year when it's only 3 months of really using the software. Well, when the case is maybe they're actually solving for the problem of they want to digitally store all of these, and so this is actually a key way for them to do that. And so that year-long access that they maybe by law have to have on hand is much easier for them to keep compliance. And so that's what they're ultimately purchasing. So just using that as an example, in terms of your question around like the best time to like actually put an offer in front of them to pay was yesterday, but the next best is tomorrow, and having a strategic way to have that conversation of saying, it's not just purely saying we're putting pricing in front of them, but it's a demonstration of value. And I think that that's been the gap, is like they're using it, which is great, because like basically it is a digital version of the paper thing they probably were already using, but we had no friction in that process because they didn't have to pay us for it. And so in the process of putting that offer is their willingness to pay, is there has to be some leap in value that they're getting out of it. And so it's not simply just probably the documentation, but there's something else that they're buying, some other outcome associated with it. And the pricing should be a dictation of that return on investment. And so part of that could be just they're buying a peace of mind that they don't lose the form, or they're buying a reduction in maybe they currently have to store these in boxes for 7 years, and so therefore like their space is getting out of control or something, right? So like what are they actually purchasing outside of the software? So like what are those outcomes that they're deriving?
Couldn't agree more. One last thing I think we'd be remiss to not mention is this idea of what the revenue model actually is. We baked in this assumption into the question, or not we didn't, but the questioner baked in this assumption that it's a monthly fee. And so they're going to pay a monthly rate, and now we have, fees in the summer and nobody wants to pay in the winter, and all these problems are stemming not from the seasonality of the business necessarily, but because of that revenue model. And so we can look at different business model patterns to overlay on that to find some potentially different choices that we might be able to make. I'm just going to give one that's just illustrative. I'm not saying it's a good idea. It's a bad idea for you to turn into a good one. Explore more business model patterns. If you want to get a list of all of these business model patterns, hit me up, throw me some email. I will send you a paper with 55 business model patterns for you to play around with. And that's open to anybody, by the way. Just throw me a DM, and I'll do that. Okay, but one example would be to do it based on a percent of transaction. So you're doing booking and waiver management. So because you're doing the booking, if the money is flowing through you, you could take a percent of the transaction. Then they're only ever paying you when they do a booking. So instead of saying like, oh, I have this $25 a month charge or whatever it is, why am I paying for this in June? Makes sense to pay for it in June, doesn't make sense in March when we're having hurricanes or whatever. And so they're thinking about it differently, whereas it's like, oh, I'm not getting charged because nobody's booking. And for the companies that are actually running it year round, they're still paying for it all the time. The companies who are only running it in the summer are only paying for it when they need it, and it's sort of tied to that. That doesn't work in a lot of cases for people who set their prices in a way that has a psychological component to it, where it's like that, where they introduce a price sensitivity, like I can't charge my customers more, so I don't want to give you a percentage of what I'm doing. Like that's not necessarily fair because they're paying for it either way. But there are some psychological barriers, so I'm not saying that's the solution. But you can explore different patterns, and there are lots of different ways to get around it. We've talked a lot before about seasonality in businesses and how that can affect businesses. So I'll just direct you to some of those. Again, shoot me a message and I'll throw you to some specific episodes of the podcast where we talked about it, or to our office hours where we talked about it, and you can address that a little bit more. But that's all I got.
Cool.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
Or as Philip said,
Obviously.
Okay. Great. We'll vamp for just one more moment to allow the delay to come through, so that if you have a lot of questions, you can do it. Otherwise, we'll hop away. While we are, getting prepared for that. Well, yeah, like letting them, get a, like while we're waiting, vamping for a moment because we have a few minutes left. You watching any good shows? What you got going on?
Well, there've been a lot of recommendations from you. So watching Better Off Ted, that's kind of my passive, while I'm working on stuff. I did start Justified probably few months ago. So I've been slowly working my way through that. I'm in season 4. So that's a really great show. So highly recommend it.
Which one's the villain in season 4?
There's still Boyd is still in that. But
Yeah, but there's always the secondary villain. Is it the blue-eyed?
no, he's gone.
That was season 3?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was the end of season 3.
The end of season 3 was so good.
Yeah, so I'm early in season 4, so we're still kind of learning who the players are.
Awesome.
So what about you? What are you watching?
I'm actually not watching a huge amount right now. I am going through the last few episodes of Shrinking on Apple TV, which is great. First of all, like seeing Harrison Ford in a TV show is great. It feels like they're wrapping up. I haven't checked to see if it was renewed, but I would be surprised if it was. The premise, I think they've stretched it as far as they can, and they're setting up Harrison Ford leaving, like as retiring, and so I just don't see it living on beyond this season anyway. So it looks like they're about to wrap everything up, but it's very charming. It's a fun show. Not the best show ever, but it's definitely a good show and fun to watch. Apple TV's got some good stuff.
Apple TV does punch above its weight for sure.
Yeah, and this is like I love the future of television is now, and we get these like this cinema quality.
Future of
TV is now, and for the low monthly price.
How does that work?
The future is now.
But now it's the present.
Yeah.
How's it the future?
There is no future. There is no past. There is only now.
Mm-hmm. It's very zen.
Thank you. I think we probably vamped long enough for that. But great. Love it. Where are you? So you're at season 4. How far are you into Better Off Ted?
I'm only episode 4.
Okay, got it. So you still got a bit to go. Oh, the water fountain one, was that early?
Yeah, that was number 4. So I guess I'm on 5 then. So
for some reason I was thinking it was like second season or something. That was further in.
Better
Off Ted's a great show if you like something that's it's silly, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty silly. It's immature, but not in an offensive way. Like I don't like a lot of I don't even know what do we call that category. Juvenile comedy is not necessarily my forte, but this is immature in a different way. It's just kind of silly and fun, which I think is great. I think the best show in that genre, I think, is Community. Have you ever seen Community?
Mm-mm.
We'll talk about that another time. All right, for that, that brings us to an end. We spent 3 minutes talking about pop culture. This has been your pop culture happy 3 minutes or something like that. But we will be back next week, continuing with our office hours. You can submit your questions in advance at jdm.bio. You can join us live noon Pacific on YouTube and LinkedIn. Join us, hang out with us, do that. And if you guys want to start coming on camera, coming on screen, and asking some questions live in that format, let us know. We're exploring some ways that we could do that so it doesn't have to be all through the chat. Anything else?
No, I think that's it. So thanks everyone for joining it, and we'll sign